The president continued his smear campaign against Congressman Elijah Cummings yesterday, ramping up his assault with unsubstantiated allegations of corruption. Trump tweeted last night, Baltimore's numbers the worst in the United States on crime and the economy. Billions of dollars have been pumped in over the years, but to no avail. The money was stolen or wasted. Ask Elijah Cummings where it went. He should investigate himself with his oversight committee. So the president going after him as head of oversight. That is an interesting parallel. That is an interesting enemy that the president is taking on. We are also hearing from Republican Congressman Mark Meadows, whose friendship with Cummings was on display when the House Oversight Chairman defended Mark Meadows against allegations of racism earlier this year. His response came as the president attacked his friend for a third straight day on Twitter, accusing him of being racist. Meadows writes this: I'm friends with both men and President Trump and Chairman Cummings. I know both men well. Neither man is a racist, period. Both love America. I think if we put aside partisanship with investigations, we can find bipartisan solutions that will benefit not only Chairman Cummings' district, but the country as a whole. I am committed to working to that end with both of them. Meadows did not mention Trump's claim that Cummings engages in, quote, radical oversight and is a, quote, incompetent leader. The statement also ignored Trump's claim that Cummings' district is a filthy, disgusting, rat and rodent-infested mess where no human being would want to live. But earlier this year, Meadows cried. He cried really hard when he himself was accused of being on the wrong side of an issue involving race. Take a look.
My nieces and nephews are people of color. Not many people know that. You know that, Mr. Chairman. You and I have a personal relationship that's not based on color.
Mr. Meadows, you know, and of all the people on this committee, I've said it and got in trouble for it, that you're one of my best friends. I know that shocks a lot of people.
And likewise, Mr. Chairman.
But you are. And I could see and feel your pain. I feel it.
Really? Mark Meadows, just a couple of questions. Can you feel Elijah Cummings' pain when he's called a racist? Because you were crying there. You were truly upset. You were deeply shocked and appalled that you were called a racist. And Elijah stood up for you. Right there in front of the cameras, come what may. No matter what happened to him, he stood with his friend, and you couldn't even do it. But you were so upset, you were crying like a baby. You were crying so hard at the thought of being called a racist, so you know how much that hurts, especially if it's not true, and you did not stand up for your friend. So you have just shown America that you cannot be counted on. You have just showed your voters you cannot be counted on, that you will take the weak way out. That was pathetic. You had a moment yesterday where you could step up and return the favor because it was the right thing to do, and you took a pass because you are weak and spineless, and you think that some sort of relationship with this president is going to bring you somewhere good. If he leaves office after 4 years, there's a chance he won't even go back to Mar-a-Lago. This doesn't end well, Mark Meadows. And also, it's a matter of right and wrong. It's a matter of right and wrong. You know what it feels like to be called a racist when you believe you're not, which many would question about you, but he didn't. He took a stand in real time. You took a pathetic, many moments to figure out some sort of pathetic statement that said nothing. You did nothing. Gene Robinson, any problem with anything I'm saying?
No problem. I think you used the word pathetic 3 times. I think that's the right word. Unconscionable, disgraceful. Those are another couple of words that you could use for Meadows' performance. Cummings didn't have to go out on that limb for him. Cummings didn't have to, at that point, when Meadows was under attack, Cummings didn't have to come to his defense so forcefully.
Do you remember, Gene? Do you remember what happened leading up to that moment where Meadows was crying crocodile tears? Do you remember that woman they brought out? It was a pathetic display. And Elijah Cummings put his hand up and said, no, we're not using the word racist. We're not. I know this man. I've worked with him. He stood up for him in real time.
And that really ridiculous and again disgraceful sort of I know both men response is not the same thing as coming to the defense of someone who you claim is a friend, who showed he was a friend to you, a real friend to you. It's just awful. It's amazing the whole. Michael Steele was talking earlier about the what he's seeing among Republicans about Trump, and it is simply true that there is no Republican Party anymore. It is the Trump Party. You know, I have serious questions about whether Donald Trump can expand his base to the point where he could actually get reelected, but I have no doubt about his control of the vast majority of self-identified Republicans right now. He is the Republican Party. It is not the party of Lincoln. It's the party of Trump, and Republicans and Republican office holders and the Republican base are following him, I believe off a cliff, but following him like some sort of demented Pied Piper. It is just, it's appalling, but this is the world we live in.
You know, Michael Steele, I hope Elijah Cummings and Mark Meadows really are friends. I think it's good for government. It's good for the country. They can work on legislation together. But I don't know a lot of friends who would have sat there for 3 days and waited and calculated what's the right thing for me to say so I don't anger the President of the United States. And it goes, as you know better than anyone, to Gene's larger point, which is that Donald Trump has done something to Republicans and to the Republican Party where they are not behaving the way they want to behave. In other words, they're doing things to please Donald Trump. They're calculating, they're thinking through, how do I say this? How do I legislate even in a way that will please President Trump? Even when it's a direct attack on a friend, they can't respond the way that a normal human being would respond for fear of upsetting President Trump.
They've thrown virtue and value out the window because those things anchor down your choices. It makes it hard to stand with Trump if you still value the propositions and the ideals of the Republican Party of, let's say Ronald Reagan, or even, you know, William F. Buckley, all of the stalwarts who built the modern conservative party have largely been set aside. Let's just put it that way. There's a stronger word I could use. But the reality and the truth, I think, boils down to that moment that Mika was just talking about and clarified so well with one word, pathetic, because it applies to so much that we've seen. As a lifelong Republican, it has been hard for me to watch the pathetic, childlike display of sycophantic behavior by a party that said it belonged to Lincoln.
Okay,
that
Michael.
it belonged to Frederick Douglass. And yet, in a moment like that, it took Mark Meadows 3 days to come up with that support.
Zilch.
For his friend. With friends like that, Elijah Cummings, brother, you need to check that, because I don't know if I go into a fight, he's going to have my back the way you had his in front of the nation a few weeks ago.
Michael, we've been listening to you. I've been listening to you for a long time. You make a lot of sense. But history is a constant stenographer. It never stops recording what happens. There's got to be some explanation other than fear of being primaried on your right from all these people in the House and the Senate. There's, other than fear of Donald Trump. What is the answer here? Why do they fold unceasingly, one after another?
I think it's probably, again, it's driven more from the bottom up here. This is not the leadership and elected officials necessarily taking these positions on their own. They're reacting to a base of Republicans that has turned on itself. And a lot of it, Mike, goes back to the promises that were made that were broken, the sense that you promised us these things, that you said these things were of value, and then went off and did something different. You know, you have folks who looked at the spending in the Bush era, and yet here we are with Trump spending 3-4 times that amount, and seemingly they don't care. And I think that's pretty much the attitude is, look, all those things you told us and promised us were true. We realize they're not. So Donald Trump is the guy who's exposing that, and we support him for exposing that lie. But there's more to it than that, because it has an impact. It rips at a fabric about who we are as a country and who we are as a party. And I think that's going to be what the party's going to have to grapple with when Trump is no longer the center of their universe. When that star is gone, how do those planets revolve? Where did they revolve around? And before, it was always those ideas that we proposed were true. Now maybe they're not so true.
Well, it's worth taking a moment to investigate what sent President Trump on the warpath against Congressman Cummings. The Washington Post reports that Trump was frustrated that the Oversight Committee that Cummings chairs authorized a subpoena last week that could sweep up emails from his daughter and son-in-law as part of its probe into potential conflicts of interest in the Trump administration. The specific focus of the subpoena is Jared Kushner's use of WhatsApp to communicate with foreign individuals as part of a wide-ranging investigation into whether senior administration officials broke federal records laws by using private accounts for official purposes. Trump was also annoyed that Cummings stood alongside Democratic leaders discussing the possibility of impeachment after Robert Mueller's testimony, and was particularly incensed when the longtime Democratic lawmaker lambasted Trump's acting head of Homeland Security over reports from the border of a child sitting in its own feces and can't take a shower. So, here we go. Coming up on Morning Joe, by some accounts, Kamala Harris got the better of Joe Biden during their first debate, but their poll numbers tell a different story. We'll get to that just ahead. Plus, Steve Kornacki is doing what he does best. He's got a great new piece on the journey to power, the history of black voters over the past 4 decades. It's a must-read.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.